Welcome to our Sunday service. It's good to have your company this 26th day of June. It is nice to have you along, Lisa, as always, reading through scriptures and giving people a service across our broadcast regions, and for those that join us on the internet also.
Yes, it certainly is good to be able to delve into the scriptures and to see what we can garner from the wisdom there.
All right, last week David DeLima was with us and discussed the Nicene Creed. This week he joins us, and we're going to be looking at the topic of seasons because, of course, we had the winter solstice, the southern winter solstice this week. Welcome, David. How are you?
Thank you, Wayne. Lisa, great to be with you again.
And a very interesting topic to preface it, David. We're going to look at, is there a relationship between the seasons that we've had, this winter solstice that we're talking about, and God's plan for us all?
Yes, we will be looking at that indeed, and happy Sunday to all the listeners. It's the day when we think about the sun, when you think it through, and of course it's the Lord's Day, so let us rejoice and be glad in it.
We are going to do that, and we're going to play some music for you too. It's your Sunday service. We're looking at the seasons and their implications to us, whether they have anything that may well have come from a biblical context, and also whether we live our lives and the seasons of life in general. It's a very interesting topic. It has some very important spiritual implications here on our Sunday service. On our Sunday service, joined by David DeLima and Lisa and I, it's an opportunity for us to reflect in the last week on what is called the southern winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. I got up, it was dark, and I came home from work, it was dark again, David. I mean, I felt ripped off, really.
Well, it's a wonderful time of year for those who are looking forward to some sunshine because the days are now slightly longer, one by one. But we've had this week, as you say, the winter solstice. Sol there meaning sun, as in solar power, solar energy or something, and the stace part, static, being still. So I've never done this, and I don't recommend any of the listeners do it, but apparently if you look at the sun, or possibly you can put a pen in a piece of paper and see its movements that way without damaging your eyesight, but apparently the sun seems to stand still twice a year. And so that's why we have the term solstice, and between the two of those we have the two equinoxes where day and night are of equal length. I found out recently, I was astonished by this, but the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt, it signals the equinoxes, and the pyramids are thought to be 4 sides, but that one in particular is 8 sides, only very slightly, and that means that it casts a shadow. So the side is split just for a few seconds twice a year. So these ancients, they were looking very carefully at the heavens, and of course the scriptures speak very much about the value of looking at the heavens and seeing the glory of God.
It's incredible intelligence, really, isn't it, that we, underestimate what they were able to perceive at that time.
It says in Genesis 1:14, and God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs and mark sacred times and days and years." So that's from God to the writer of Genesis, which many believe are the patriarchal the documents handed down from the first men, Adam, and right through to Moses, who compiled them for us in the Old Testament of the Bible today. And David, when we talk about this solstice, this shortened day of the year, in the medieval times they looked for a longer day, more sunlight, more sunshine, yes. More blessing, because there was more growth they felt in the sunlight, and in the darkness, of course, the shorter of the day meant it was more darker, and so therefore it was, if you like, more evil in that sense.
Yes, there are different ways of looking at it, of course, but what it really boils down to is that God is speaking to us through creation, and He's marvellously provided these time indicators. So Genesis speaks about summer and winter, and that's a fairly vague term, but you can pin down the solstice or the equinox to within just a matter of seconds, really, as the ancients understood. And so you can get a very precise fix on what is this notion of the year. So we're very blessed there. Once you can develop a calendar, you can develop all sorts of other things as well, scheduling of trains and planes and all sorts of things like that. You can measure time. So wonderfully, God is speaking to us about his own character, that he is a God of order. And unlike some religions where you would pray every day that the sun would rise, we as Christians recognise that God has set the sun and the earth in their celestial movements from the beginning of creation, and therefore he has revealed himself to us as a God of order and a God of enormous creativity.
Yeah, it certainly is interesting you say that. And when we return, we're going to look at some of the scriptural passages that have been written, in some cases 3,000 plus years ago, other passages a couple of thousand years ago. And when we reflect on them, we're going to look at just what David has said, how the Christian church, in the seasons and in the creation, how we actually see them bearing testimony to the faith that we have and Christ coming to fulfill that which was created before him. He was there at the beginning of creation, and so he is part of creation, and we believe in him. So it is a very interesting topic today as we reflect on a week past where we had the shortest day and what that does mean. Returning to the Sunday service, the shortened nature of this week, it was, well, they say June 21 is the shortest day, but some also say June 20 because it could be both. Depends on which part of the world you might be in, maybe, David. But it is a really interesting one because we see in this creation the order that you mentioned only just before about God's order. And Lisa, you've something to read for us.
Yes, it says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and all their words to the end of the world. In them he has set a tabernacle for the sun, which is like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, and rejoices like a strong man to run its race. Its rising is from one end of heaven, and its circuit to the other end, and there is nothing hidden from its heat."
And Romans 1:20, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that the people are without excuse." Very interesting words, David.
Yes, one they are indeed. And so we've got both Old and New Testament making the same point, that God is speaking through creation. So we have the Holy Scriptures, but we also have the book of creation. And if any of our listeners are struggling to take seriously the words of the Old Testament and the New Testament, well, let them be confirmed in their reliability as we look at how creation itself speaks. And there's a wonderful passage in the book of Job which says that God suspends the earth over nothing. It's from the 26th chapter of the book of Job. And I'm just reminded of the crew of the Apollo spacecraft going up there and taking a wonderful picture as they look back from the moon. And this was the famous image of the Earth taken by the Apollo 17 astronauts, and just shows it suspended over nothing. So inspired there in the book of Job, we've got that description long before we had such a thing as space rockets. But it's just making the point that God has wonderfully made the earth, and here we are enjoying this paradise. As we look at the other planets in our solar system, we see what miserable places they would be to live. And with the moon, you've got to take your own atmosphere with you. It's a dangerous and cold and hot place at the same time, depending on which side of the moon you're on. And so here we are on Earth enjoying this paradise. How powerfully that confirms to us that God loves us.
It's beautiful how everything is made in its order and is held by the word of his power.
There is a time for everything. It's Ecclesiastes 3:1-11. And these are the seasons that we've just been talking about. There is a time for every season, every activity under the heavens, for being born and to die, to plant and to uproot, kill and heal, tear down, build up, weep and laugh, mourn and dance, scattering stones or gathering them, embracing and refraining, searching and giving up, keeping time or throwing away, tearing or mending, and silent or speaking, loving or even hate, war and peace, a time for all of us to toil under the sun. Yet you've heard the words there of both David and Lisa, that even so, there is that God has created us this opportunity to commune with Him in this beautiful creation. He created us with the rest of creation.
I think I love that beautiful part there, Wayne, when you refer to in Ecclesiastes verse 11, it actually says that He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. We can't work it out.
Beautiful.
Wayne and Lisa, we certainly see both the benevolence of God and the creativity of God in His wonderful works in the heavenly realms. So we look up, and anyone can do this in any part of the world, and see, on a clear night at least, the glory of the stars, the glory of the Milky Way, the profound wonder of the eclipse, which graces every part of the earth sooner or later, and seeing the shooting stars, and seeing the nebulae there in the heavens. And now, of course, with modern equipment, we can see much more wonderfully all of those heavenly delights. So there we're seeing the creativity of God and how He loves us by giving us these delightful things to enjoy. But we also perceive the benevolence of God, and this requires somewhat more modern astronomical conclusions. But the experts say that if it were not for the planet Jupiter attracting to itself the comets and other debris that's out there, that there'd be no life on Earth, because we would have now been bombarded into extinction. So God has placed the planet Jupiter there as a giant cosmological vacuum cleaner, we might say. So there we're seeing the benevolence of God. And I'm told also that if the Earth did not have the Moon as its partner, then the Earth's orbit and rotation would become chaotic, and there'd be no life on Earth possible as well. So everything would just be destroyed. So we're seeing the benevolence of God there with respect to the Moon and to Jupiter. And I'm just, moved almost to fall on my knees as I contemplate these realities, that God is being so kind to us in ways that we don't even understand most of the time.
Genesis 1:14 says, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times, the days and the years," which those astronauts in Apollo 17 certainly saw. And you've just given us a really good understanding of how the planets have been set in their places specifically, which the Bible actually foretold. And remembering these are people living 3,000 years, in the case, say, of Job, before our time, with none of the telescopic equipment that we have today to know it. They simply, by faith, wrote down what they believed God in His Spirit was telling them, and they passed that down to the next generation, both in the written form, but also in the audible form, which we are able to enjoy today. We're continuing our Sunday service looking at creation, looking at astronomy, and seeing the seasons, and how the sun this week was at its point where it changes from a day being shorter to one being longer. We don't fully, in our human understanding, exactly know how God did that and why He did that, but we do know it happens. And Lisa, you've got something really interesting to read for us that maybe puts the position of the stars in heaven, why they're there in its context.
Yes, we're looking at Job 9, verse 4 to 10, and we're reading from the New International Version of the Bible. God is wise in heart and mighty in strength, who has hardened himself against him and prospered. He removes the mountains, and they do not know. When he overturns them in his anger, he shakes the earth out of its place, and its pillars tremble. He commands the sun, and it does not rise. He seals off the stars. He alone spreads out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. He made the Bear, Orion, and the Pleiades, and the chambers of the south. He does great things past finding out, yes, wonders without number.
Yes, the chambers of the south, the Southern Cross, which is on our flag, a reflection of the cross, if you like, of Christ that
Yes.
is there. There is, in fact, the story of creation in the stars, and a learned gentleman by the name of Barry Setterfield, a friend of our family, who has written in a whole range of scientific papers, talks about the way in which the stars have been laid out by God, and he named them, yet God in Genesis says to Adam that he should name all the animals. So God names the stars, and they have a story to tell, but man named the animals because man had dominion over the animals.
And this was something that they actually did once ago, a long time ago, with the Magi, which was the wise men. They looked at the stars. They were astronomers. They looked to see what the signs of the times were to be. This was a fact of life at that time.
Those magi, as we like to call them, or the wise men, they were certainly astrologers. They were looking at the heavenly realms. They were seeing a sign which God had himself placed in the sky to indicate the birth of the Messiah in Judea, and so they followed the star and arrived in Jerusalem. So we know that story well. King David also considered the stars. When I consider the work of your hands, he speaks, what is man that thou art mindful of him, the Son of Man that you would care for him? It's Psalm 8. He is reflecting on his own puny state, if you like, as he considers the wonderful handiwork of God. So as well as seeing today the benevolence of God in putting the moon and the Jupiter there to safeguard the planet, we see the creativity of God with the glory of the stars and the eclipses. And now we're seeing something about who we are. And Wayne, you're absolutely right in pointing out that God names the stars and then commissions Adam to name the animals. In that sense, Adam is doing the work of God. Now, we're to be like God without trying to be God, if you know what I mean. We're made in the image of God, and therefore we do the things that God does.
It really is such an honour and a privilege to be put in that position.
So though we are both puny in relation to the stars, we are also gloriously elevated as the pinnacle of creation, as Psalm 8 points out. And so we get to name creation and to steward creation, but we do so in recognition of God as one who is wise and sovereign. So God is wise to create the heavenly being, the heavenly objects there, the celestial planets and stars and the Milky Way and the nebulae and so on, and his sovereignty. So this humbles us enormously. So God is really speaking to us about his character as one who's benevolent, creative, wise, and sovereign.
Yes, and it refers back to the whole passage that we were referring to last week, I think it was, regarding royalty, that we're a holy priesthood, a chosen generation. We have been elevated and we have an opportunity to have a deep and abiding relationship with God.
And in a spiritual sense, Proverbs 10 verse 5 says that he who gathers crops in summer is a prudent son, but he who sleeps during harvest is a disgraceful son. In a sense, we get a choice as to whether we participate in the work of God, if you like, to harvest the crops in summer, or do we go to sleep and just simply not participate in his plans and purposes for us in his creation? And I say that in a spiritual sense as a simile to the crop and the harvest, or those that sleep through the harvest. I think that's what Proverbs 10:5 is really saying.
Yes. As the old saying goes, make hay when the sun shines.
Yes, there's a few people out there that would like the sun to shine right now to get their crops up because it's so wet. If you're in the Urannah area or Lockhart of the Riverine of New South Wales, you might be asking for God to let the heavens declare less rain for a little bit because it's been flooding rain. And wonderfully received. The mid-north of South Australia had a late start, but magnificent rains have fallen from the heavens, and the Eyre Peninsula has been inundated on many occasions to what farmers are saying to be the best start that they've seen. Even the Mallee of Victoria around Birchip and hoped and have expressed their view that this is like a start to the season, that even the older men can't remember such bountiful blessing in rain. So it is wonderful that we can give praise and glory and thanks to God for his goodness to us in providing for us the rains from heaven. Thanks everybody for being with us on the Sunday service. I talked about stars before and the reflection of God in them. There is a paper on it at barrysetterfield.org. That's Setterfield, SETTERFIELD.org and /star gospel. Well worth a read if you're intrigued by how the heavens were named and how they could be named by God, and why it's so important to reflect on it today. And Lisa, we're reflecting on this from a book in the Bible written by a fellow called Nehemiah.
Yes.
That's knee-high, almost. That's where they have children's Sunday school jokes come from. But Nehemiah wrote around about 490, 500 years before Christ.
That's right. And we're looking at chapter 9 of Nehemiah, and it's about the children of Israel. They're confessing their sins, and they're actually assembling together, fasting and praying to God. And we're going from verse 5. It says, "And the Levites, Jeshua, Kadmiel, Bani, Hashbaniah, Sherebiah, Hodjah, Shebaniah, and Pethiah said, 'Stand up and bless the Lord your God forever and ever. Blessed be your glorious name, which is exalted above all blessing and praise. You alone are the Lord. You have made heaven, the heaven of heavens with all their host, the earth and everything on it, the seas and all that is in them, and you preserve them all. The host of heaven worships you.'"
Wayne and Lisa, we've been speaking about the way in which God's benevolence, that is his loving kindness, is shown, his creativity, his wisdom and sovereignty. We're seeing him also as revealing Jesus as Saviour through creation. Now, according to the pattern of creation, every plant or tree or hibernating animal that seems to die and rise with the seasons, it's giving testimony to the death and resurrection of Jesus. So the farming listeners especially are blessed to be able to handle these creational elements as they plant the seed, which is effectively burying it in the earth as we bury the dead. But that's not the end, it's only the beginning. And as the wheat yields itself to death, it produces life. And we see in the hibernating animal, the bears and others, not so much in Australia, but in the colder parts of the world.
Oh yes, we've got some snakes that hibernate.
We do, quite right, yeah.
We're keeping right away from them too.
We're keeping away from them, but in their own way, they are giving testimony to the death and resurrection of Jesus. So it's all there in creation, and we see this annually as well, as there's the dying and rising, if you like, of the seasons. Jesus himself is wonderfully called the bright morning star, according to Revelation, so there's that wonderful connection. But I want to take us, as we're reaching the end of our time together today, just once again to the Australian flag, because there we have both crosses and stars. I've often thought it should be given a name as Australia's star-crossed banner, because we don't have a popular name for the flag, unlike the United States, which has got 3 popular names for their flag. But in the Australian flag we have 6 stars and 4 Christian crosses. I'll say again, 6 stars and 4 Christian crosses. Britain itself has only got 3 Christian crosses there on the Union Jack. How wonderful it is when children outdo their parents. That's exactly what we've done here in Australia by adding the Southern Cross to the 3 crosses of the Union flag. So what a wonderful, glorious symbol that is, as we've looked up to the heavens, seen that image of the cross of Christ and said, we've got to put that on our flag. That's a wonderful statement. And I love to think of the way in which the stars of the Southern Cross speak to us of the woundings or the piercings of Christ, because he was wounded on head, both hands, side, and probably with one spike fixed to the cross by the feet. So what a wonderful image that is. I hasten to add that the Southern Cross is visible in the southern regions, of course, but at the time of the death of Jesus, it was visible in Jerusalem. The reason for that is that the earth undergoes a very long process which is called precession. It's the precession of the equinoxes, technically. It's a bit like a spinning top. You know how a spinning top rapidly revolves around a point, but it also very slowly moves around. And there's this very long cycle, which means that things that are not visible now in the northern hemisphere, for example, were back then. And the Southern Cross was just visible in Jerusalem at the time of the death of Jesus.
That's
Very
incredible.
interesting. Very interesting indeed. And it's something that we're pleased to be able to bring you this morning. It stemmed from just one little occurrence this week, and that was the shortest day of the year. But we can see the relevance in the Bible to what these seasons, these times, these, if you like, creations, but also things like stars and planets in the heavens and how they do hold together the very fabric of our lives, the atom in its such minuteness, yet it does in fact have the power that brings together all matter. And so we will certainly continue to look at these topics and a Sunday service, the creation of God. It's been a really interesting one. We're going to come back and wrap it up in just a moment. Sunday service, looking at wrapping up a very interesting topic, and it's been about the seasons and also the stars in the heavens. And Lisa, a passage, and not necessarily on a somber note, but one to really reflect on where we are, each of us as people. The stars have got a story that has been told already, and at the Christ that came to earth, and it's found in the book of Revelation, this passage in the Bible, the New Testament, written by the Apostle John on the Isle of Patmos at the end of his life, and reflecting on what he was being given, a revelation of, as we often see it, things to come.
That's right, and it says in Revelation 12, 1-5 we're looking at, "Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then, being with child, she cried out in labour and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail drew a third of the stars of heaven, and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. She bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and his throne."
Lisa, what a wonderful passage. The astronomical imagery that we read there in the book of Revelation, it's really telling the story of Jesus, who was nearly killed as a baby by Herod, that wicked fellow, but then as Jesus triumphs over death, both at that point and later after dying on the cross, he goes up to heaven. And so that means, as we perceive the wonderful astronomical imagery there in the text, well, it must surely prompt us to look up at the heavens with a much deeper appreciation of Jesus Christ.
Yes, the heavens declare the glory of the Lord, as you begun with as our first passage earlier on, David. And there is much imagery, but also much truth. And each one of us has to make a response to the God of heaven, the God who spread and flung the stars out there. But also there's imagery of a dragon, the evil one, and those third of the stars that were cast down. And so there is the evil that is around about us, and each one of us is confronted with that evil each day, and our choice as to what we do and respond, and in so doing our response to God, whether we accept him or whether we go our own way and accept that we know better than the God that created the universe.
How reassuring that in the book of Revelation, it's the end story, it's the end of the book, and we can actually look at the book of Revelation and take courage and reassurance that God has everything in his hands and he is in control.
And so that concludes our Sunday service. Thank you to David and Lisa. It's been great to be with you today, and we'll join you again next week.